I would like to officially begin our virtual launch of SA Smart 2022. My name is Dr. Cliff Zintgraff. I'm the Chief Learning Officer at SAMSAT, the San Antonio Museum of Science and Technology. And I'm the chair of SA Smart, and I want to let my colleague introduce herself as well. Natasha, Wilkerson, please.
Hi, everyone. If I can get the tech team to turn off our music so you can hear all of our guests. Welcome to all of our students that are watching, those that are watching live, those that are going to be watching this afterwards. I'm Natasha Wilkerson. I'm the co-chair with Dr. Zintgraff, and I am the STEM director with Communities and Schools of San Antonio. Big welcome. I'm so excited for this new SA Smart competition.
So we have just a very few slides to show you for those who are educators and students who may not be familiar with our challenge. What you're looking at here is our photo op. Mayor Ron, if I may call your attention to this, to our competition day last year. And our great effort here to get a photo op of our students. And what I'd like you all to know is that in 2021, we had 45 teams that were participating in the SA Smart Challenge. We awarded 5 trophies. And believe it or not, this is hard for me to believe, we are entering our 5th year of this competition. And in the prior years, we served 750 students talking about food insecurity. The year before that, digital inclusion. The year before that, sustainability. And the year before that, our first year, transportation. This year, our challenge to you, the students, is water resources in San Antonio. And I'm going to take a moment to read this. Propose a product, service, or strategy tied to specific local circumstances for how San Antonio can best use and manage water for the long-term benefit of its residents. This is our challenge for SA Smart 2022. This is the beginning of the journey this year. And we are now going to move straight into our panel. And we're going to start it with Mayor Ron Nurenberg. Mayor Ron, we know that you've been thinking about water for a long time. We had that quote up on the screen that welcomed our guests. But you know, when we talk to students about water, we might be talking about drinking water. We might be talking about household use. Maybe we're talking about recreation. Maybe we're talking about conservation. We'd just like to open the floor to you for some opening comments. You know, when we talk about water in San Antonio, what's on your mind that you'd like to share with our students and our teachers?
Well, thank you, Cliff. And I can't claim to be thinking about water longer than my co-panelist here, Robert Puente, who leads our San Antonio water system, and probably also not as long as Dr. Michael Weber, who I'm really grateful to be part of the panel with. But certainly as a council member in District 8 in the northwest part of San Antonio, and now as mayor, I have been thinking about water and the challenges that we've faced with it. And, you know, it starts with the fact that San Antonio probably wouldn't even be on the map if not for water and the confluence of waterways we know in the creeks and rivers that run through it. But in particular, why San Antonio was settled in the first place, arguably, is because of the largest single source aquifer in the world, and that is the Edwards Aquifer, which we reside over right now. It has, for the better part of our history, been the primary source of potable drinking water for our community. And up until the 90s was really an unregulated source of water in all practical purposes. But now it is regulated federally, and we at the local level have an opportunity and a responsibility to manage it well, so that not only will we, but in future generations of San Antonians be able to enjoy the resources of the Edwards Aquifer, but also the communities around us who largely depend on the aquifer as well. And what that means for us is that we've got to figure out a way to supply water in the future for our community and for the communities that share this land in Texas that largely is supplied by the Edwards. It involves not only protecting that source of water, the Edwards, and that requires environmental stewardship, but it also means us committing to leave some there for each other. And so as we think about the growth of the San Antonio and Texas population and the rapid urbanization, the city's growth, particularly here in San Antonio and the Austin corridor, along with Houston and Dallas, Fort Worth, and El Paso, the major cities of Texas growing, we've got to figure out a way to make sure that there's water available for our communities well into the future. And that means diversifying our water sources. So that, to me, today remains our challenge and how we think about supplying and managing our water sources, which makes the work of the San Antonio water system and really, I think, the visionary work of the San Antonio water system in terms of being able to supply sources in the future, as well as protect one of our primary sources, the Edwards Aquifer, so very, very important and challenging, and influences everything that we do here at the city, including how we grow and build our communities. So long story short, that's the challenge that we live with as stewards of our water sources, but also why I think water is one of the primary issues, not only of today, but into the future as Texans and certainly as San Antonians.
Mayor, your comments echo some of the questions that we heard from the students, and we may get an opportunity later to hear a few from those students directly. So Natasha, allow me to hand it to you, please.
Sure. So our next question are about the main uses of water. So Mr. Puente, as the mayor noted, you are the CEO of the San Antonio water system. So we are thankful to have you as an expert on this issue. And so we wanted to let the students get a sense of, one, what are the main uses of water in San Antonio? And what are some unique challenges in San Antonio? The mayor mentioned a few, and we'd love to hear from you.
Well, thank you, Natasha, and thank you, Cliff, Mike, and Mayor Nurenberg for being together with y'all. It is a pretty good panel that I want to be able to add to. So specifically, some of your questions is, how is water used in San Antonio? The vast majority of our water is used for residential purposes. It's pumped out of the ground, it's put into our distribution system, and then sent out into your homes. And there you use it for cooking, for bathing, for flushing your toilets, for irrigating your lawns. In the summertime, the big chunk of the water that we use is for irrigating lawns. So a lot of our peak demand is during that time. So it's very important that we have the infrastructure, the tanks, that at that one moment in hot 100-degree weather in August at 7:00 p.m., when everybody wants to use water to irrigate their land, to take a shower, to start cooking, that we have the infrastructure ready to push that water out. So water is very important. That's the main way we use water here in San Antonio. We don't have a lot of industry that is very water intensive, but some of our biggest water users, for example, are H-E-B Grocery. Our big employer, H-E-B, uses a lot of water, and that doesn't mean they waste water. They just use a lot. Our universities use a lot of water for reasons that are somewhat obvious, as they have a lot of people on their campuses. So again, that's a whole lot of water use, but it's not bad water use, it's good water use. And my job to some extent is to make sure that all of your students out there and their parents take us for granted. To some extent, we don't want you to notice what we do. We don't want you to think twice, as they do in some third world countries, about whether or not water is going to come out of the faucet. You should know that it's always going to come out of the faucet. At the same time, we want you to take for granted that when you flush the toilet, when water leaves your sink, that you don't have to worry about it anymore. It's not going to be pooling outside of your home. It's not going to be causing a problem outside in the street. We collect it, we send it all the way to water treatment plants. We treat the water and we put it back to use in our environment. One of the unique things about San Antonio is that all that water goes to our wastewater treatment plants, but a big chunk of it we clean up and we reuse it. We have the nation's largest recycled water system. We reuse it for some industry, for Toyota, for Microsoft, for the irrigation of golf courses. So a lot of that water gets to be reused and back into that cycle again. A lot of your students out there are young, under 20, and I'm happy to report that over the last 20 years, despite all of the growth, all of those kids that have been born and using water, we're still using roughly the same amount of water in San Antonio. And that's because of our great water conservation programs, where each individual is using less water than they did 5, 6, 10, 20 years ago. So those are all very important things. So the challenges that we have, I think right now, are really about the affordability of water. We do not live in a rich community. We have to understand that water is a necessity. It's health and safety for a lot of people. And we have to make sure that we have very competitive water rates. And for those families that are in a certain economic level that they just cannot make ends meet, that we help them out with some affordability programs. So I think right now the challenge is to meet all of our infrastructure needs, but at the same time make water as inexpensive as possible for our community.
So, Mr. Puente, one thing you mentioned that I'll just note as I move to Dr. Weber is we have some students from Harlandale ISD and one of their teachers, you mentioned wastewater, they're already out taking field trips as a result of our challenge. This particular teacher has been reaching out to me and was curious what we were going to announce as the challenge for this year, and they're on their way to the wastewater plants as a result.
Well, tell me the date. I'll meet them out there and I'll walk them through it.
Oh,
we love tours. We will be ambassadors in the future for our water system. So please let me know when it is. I'll meet them out there.
I'm making a note right now. I just typed it in. That's spectacular. Thank you. So, Dr. Weber, the next question is for you, and you have a unique view, I would say. I'm certain that everyone here has got some kind of global. All the panelists have some kind of global view, but you've been really focused on that. You've been traveling around the world. You've also been thinking about the relationship of water to other important issues. So what we'd really like to ask you is, what are you seeing in other places around the world? And what are some of the kind of solutions, not only the problems, but the solutions? What kinds of solutions are you seeing from around the world that our students ought to be thinking about?
That's a great question. And if you look around the world over place and time, you will learn that access to modern forms of energy and access to clean, available water is what differentiates sort of modernity in modern civilization from older times, and people have access to water and energy have access to democracy and freedoms and many other things. So we like this as in the good news. And also, if you go around the world, you can put San Antonio in context. And just to start to congratulate the city and the mayor and Robert and Saws and everyone and all the mayors and other leaders of Saws before you, San Antonio is a leader in Texas on this. If you look at where San Antonio was a couple of decades ago, individuals were consuming over 250 gallons of water per person per day, and now it's less than 120 or something like that. So you've cut your water use in half, despite sort of per person, despite growth in the economy and everything else. In cities like Austin, which pride themselves on their conservation, have been working for a decade or so to catch San Antonio. Still haven't caught you yet. We're getting closer. So you really set the mark for conservation in Texas. And I think this is really a success story you should be proud of. Now, there's further to go. If you go to Israel or Australia, they use half the amount of water per person per day as, say, a typical San Antonio resident. And that's partly because they're in desert communities. So there's more that can be done. And if you go to Israel, you see they all have a lot of water conservation devices. They turn off the shower in the middle of the shower. Like they'll turn the water on, get their hair wet, turn it off, then scrub the shampoo in, then rinse again. So the different behavioral things you can add in. And they built in a lot more efficiency and everything as part of their building codes. They have solar water heaters on the roof because it's a desert community, so they use less energy for the water heating. They built a lot of desalination plants where they can take salty water from the Mediterranean to improve their water sourcing. And for them, it's a national security issue. Water security and national security go hand in hand. Australia created a very novel water market where you can actually trade. If someone's got water and they don't need it, they can sell the water access to someone who can put it to a higher purpose. And we don't quite have that in Texas the same way, where sometimes we use water for less valuable purposes because that's the way we did it 100 years ago, growing sort of cattle feed instead of more valuable crops or other things. So I think San Antonio really sets the mark for leadership, but there's some global competitors out there. And I think there's a lot of technology, still a lot of behaviors, really continuing the education that SAWS and the city are already doing on conservation and the importance of efficiency conservation to reduce the cost, improve the reliability. I think that'll be important because one of the lessons from Winter Storm Uri is that things can go wrong. And what Winter Storm Uri, when things got really cold in February, the gas system froze up in Texas. Gas producers quit selling gas to power plants, which caused a power outage. And once you have a power outage, that turns off the power to the water and wastewater treatment plants. And it was cold, so pipes burst and people had leaks. And the solution for many of us, if we didn't know if the water was safe, was to do boiling water at home, which you can't do if you don't have energy. So the interconnections of the system are quite good in general for efficiency and cost, but you can have vulnerabilities. And so that's kind of the next problem we need to deal with, in addition to conservation efficiency, is resilience, especially if the gas system is going to freeze up. And by that, I don't mean CPS, the gas system in San Antonio didn't freeze up. I mean in West Texas. So we have these issues we need to tackle with resilience in mind now that we have universal access, as well as what Robert said about we got to make sure it's affordable and stays that way. So great compliments to San Antonio for your leadership. Keep doing it. And let's see if we can catch Israel.
Yeah. There's a challenge. The essay, the corollary to the essay Smart 2022 challenge, catch Israel. That's cool. Something that my colleague Natasha will testify to is I know how to recover. And one thing that I need to recover here is that I did not introduce that we have Mayor Ron Nurenberg, Mayor of San Antonio, the CEO of the San Antonio Water System, Mr. Robert Puente, and Dr. Michael Weber, who is the Josey Centennial Professor in Energy Resources at the Walker Department of Mechanical Engineering, UT Austin. So there I slipped that in. And Natasha, I believe you've got one last question before we bring in our students.
Yes. So I hope the students were taking notes when Dr. Weber was talking, because that was a lot of great ideas and solutions. One of the challenges that kids have in SA Smart is localizing the problem. So you talk global and, these big system issues. We ask the kids to think more specific neighborhoods, schools in their area. So I'm going to start with the mayor. How can students think about water in a localized way, and what might they be thinking about?
So we can go in a number of directions on that, but I think primarily when we think about water use at the local level, it is absolutely what Robert kind of opened up with, which is the residential use, how we irrigate our lawns, how we bathe, how we cook, how we, the water we use for drinking. And our stewardship of it requires us that we think about conservation in all of those methods. So one of the things that we have piloted over the years with SAWS in the city of San Antonio is how we harvest rainwater. And so the technologies that we're using to do that, to purify it either on site or through other processes. Robert mentioned that we have the largest water recycling system in the country. How we think about reuse of water and harvesting water that might not necessarily come from the pipes that are delivering it through SAWS is one way that we can think about water use at the hyper-local level.
And I'll open that question up if either of our other panelists want to add to how can students localize this issue?
If you don't mind, Michael, I think localizing it to themselves is very important in the sense that, and I think we've done this already because we did it to their parents, and that is to educate them that every drop of water is precious. The drop of water that you don't use is what you're conserving. And so I think those habits of turning off the water when you're brushing your teeth, of taking shorter showers, of not wasting water is very much ingrained in what we do on a day-to-day basis. So I think your students are there already. So what I would like them to further think about is the great opportunities in water when you think about everything that water encompasses. For example, in San Antonio, in Southern Bexar County, would take water out of the ground that is too salty to drink, too salty to irrigate your crops or to give your livestock. And so we clean it up, we take the salt out and put it in our distribution system, and then it tastes just like Edwards water. But the science to do that, to treat brackish water, it's so energy intensive that there's got to be scientific ways, engineering ways to save money there. A wastewater treatment plant, all of the water that goes down your sink, your commodes, your showers, goes to our wastewater treatment plant and we treat the water. A tremendous amount of energy being used there. A biological treatment system that we can always improve on. So those kinds of scientific issues, hopefully your kids get excited about, students get excited about, and know that there's careers there. Something that you don't think about when you think about water is cybersecurity. Our system is run on computers, on different systems, computer systems that really tell us a whole lot about how our water is being taken out of the ground, whether our tanks are full or not, well, what valves are open or not. And so this cybersecurity about protecting our system is also very important. You can use that in a lot of different applications, but since we're talking about water, we're talking about cybersecurity for water. So if you kind of like water and you think you like something else, do that something else, but it can always come back to water. So your kids know that it's interesting, and plus there's great opportunities in education there for them.
Great. And Dr. Weber, I'm going to give you a chance to talk here in a second, because I really want to get to the student questions, because I just want to hear from the students. This is their project. They should have a chance to ask. And so Cliff, I'm going to hand it off to you to ask for the students.
And that's funny, Natasha, you and I were both saying the same thing. I was doing it muted, so you were more effective. Yes, Dr. Weber, we're going to bring our students in, and we'll just point their question to you for starters. And so students, if you would, you could help our tech team out by identifying yourself in the chat. But in the meantime, we're also working to bring you in so that we can answer some of your questions. While waiting for that, Dr. Weber, if you could maybe do the 1 minute version. You have a global perspective. What do you know about San Antonio? What should we do here?
Yeah, a lot of things. So, and I think Robert said a lot of great solutions. And what he said that I really like is every drop of water is precious. I got to meet Ban Ki-moon, the UN Secretary General, a few years ago for a conversation. He said every drop of water is precious. That's really hung with me. And what's unusual about water compared to a lot of things is that all of us are water decision makers in our home. So you can decide how long you leave the tap open, how long you take a shower, how long you water, what you plant, that kind of thing. And there are a lot of things in life where other people making the decisions for you. Someone else might decide where the roads go and that kind of thing. But we're all water decision makers, and choosing to conserve is one thing we can do locally.
All right, so students, turn on your cameras if you're able to do that. And I want to introduce. Looks like he made his name public. I believe it's John Elliott. He is a student from the Kruger School of Applied Technology, or KSAT. KSAT, the school, not the TV station, here in San Antonio. And John, we've picked your question. The microphone is yours. Take it away.
Testing 1 2. Can you hear me? Testing 1 2. Testing 1 2.
If I could ask all the other students to make sure you've muted your mic.
Okay. How much does
And I can go ahead and post the question since we're having some audio issues.
And I'll read it.
John.
Yeah. So John, smile at everybody because we're about to read your question. All right. So John's question is the following. How much does city growth actually affect the San Antonio water system? And what part of that growth causes the most challenges? So a question about city growth, how it affects water.
Mayor, you take that one, because this was John, this was exactly the topic we were talking about this morning. We had our monthly San Antonio Water System board meeting, and this issue was exactly what we were talking about. And the mayor, you take it away, Mayor.
Thanks, Ron. You can fill in all the blanks, and I'm sure it'll leave. But this is the crux of what I was discussing earlier, and that is we have to project out our population growth, and we know that we're one of the fastest growing communities, not only in Texas but in the country. We have to use that population projection to forecast how much water we will need in the future. And because we have a limited availability of that water in the Edwards Aquifer, based on the pumping limits that we have imposed on us, we have to make sure that we have water coming in from other sources and that we're conserving the water that we do have to preserve it for future use. So that is the primary challenge with regard to water supply, outside of protecting the water that we do have, is determining how much we need. And so over the last 20 years, San Antonio Water System has worked to diversify its water sources, bringing in different kinds of sources, whether that's recycled water use, desalination of the brackish water that Robert discussed earlier, the use of the Edwards Aquifer. We also have water that we're supplying from other aquifers in more rural areas of the state. So we have to use a number of different sources in order to supply the water that we need to for the population that we have and the population that we project in the future.
And Mayor Ron, I can't help but think about the connection of this back to the very first question of SA Smart, which is the million plus people, 1.1 million people that are moving here between roughly 2018 and 2040. And
that's right. It's not just a question of water. It's all resources that we make available to each other as communities, whether that's supplying the electricity needs of a state, or housing needs, making sure that we have capacity in various transportation modes to move around. The kinds of services and resources that we provide are based on the projections of how many people will be living here in our communities and how we can continue to hone and steward the scarce resources that we currently have.
Dr. Weber, you've been waiting very patiently for your turn.
Well, yeah, the couple of comments, great questions, by the way. I'd love to see the student participation. I think there's good news and bad news from the growth. And if I speak on this, Robert can correct me if I'm wrong, but the difficulty, as you just heard from the mayor, is providing more water, expanding the water system. That means cost, that means effort. The good news is the costs are spread out over more people. So maybe there's a chance to reduce costs for everyone. So there's good and bad news with the expansion. I would say that as you have a thriving metropolis, this is great news. You also have a lot of educational opportunities. We actually have an energy and water conservation exhibit at the Museum this Saturday. So you should all come by the Museum this Saturday morning. We have a scavenger hunt and some different activities under the Watt Watchers brand about teaching energy and water conservation. So I'll be down there this Saturday. Maybe I'll see some of you there. But I think as you have more resources and more people in place, this is generally good for the economy and good for the community, but also opens up some of these educational opportunities.
Mr. Puente, we are right at the end if you want to bring us home.
Well, thank you. I would just say that water is, first of all, it's fascinating. It's a great opportunity to really know a whole lot about science, about the environment, about geology, and even about the politics. Mayor Nurenberg, when he was a council member, when he first ran, one of his big issues was water. District 8, for whatever reason, has a lot of water interest on their elected officials. So it's really, as Michael said, the decisions are in your hands. You can choose however you want to choose to use water, and you can use it wisely, and it causes a ripple effect with your other family members to where they know that it's precious and that you can really do something and make a decision on those on that water issue.
Thank you, Mr. Puente. And as we're reaching our closing time, I want to just give out a big thank you to Mayor Ron Nurenberg, to Mr. Robert Puente from San Antonio Water System, to Dr. Michael Weber from University of Texas at Austin. A special thanks to Steffi Ockenfels from CPS Energy, who brought Dr. Weber to us today. And students, this is recorded. Come back and watch it. This is gold for your competition. Thank all of you.
Let's do a photo, group
virtual
photo.
launch.
Group photo, Cliff.
I did it already.
Okay, good.
I got it.
Awesome.
Thank you, everybody. Good luck with the projects. We look forward to seeing them.
Thank you, everyone.
Good
Bye,
luck.
students. Thank you,
Mayor.
guys.
Thank you, Robert. Good to see you. Thank you, Clint. Bye, Natasha.
Bye-bye.
Bye.